I'm not an expert on architecture, don't really know much about it. And what I wanted to do is, through the discussion, looking at the architecture of buildings of two science museums. Two science museums, neither of them is a science museum. Two science museums, looking at the architecture, looking at the discussions surrounding them, both from architects and from the people who thought about this project, so some kind of famous movers. Through it, find out something new about science, about epistemologies which were kind of down there in the museums, which are to be presented in these museums. And these two buildings, so neither of the museums was also built. The space where one of the museums was to be erected was technically. Some of you saw yesterday, so when we were at the terrace in front of the Academy of Sciences, there where Luzhniki is now, so there where the studying is, the Dworzec Techniki should be, so we were standing there and Dworzec Techniki should be here. So basically in front of what is now the Academy of Sciences. And also the Mundaneum, so the second building was not built. But we have designs, we have projects, and we have discussions about this building. And my idea is that as HPS scholars we can learn something new about this, about the science of epistemology in countries. And there, of course, connection between science and architecture is discussed in, let's say, the last 20 years more intensively. Peter Gallison did it, Leslie Topp did it, also Gerd did it on several examples. And for example, there is the points of discussion which are touched there are, for example, how museums represent the question of internationality or universality of science. I will go a bit deeper, choose also different categories like progress versus historicity, and so on and so on. And if you look at the literature for museum studies, you can also think about ordering of objects within museums and so on and so on, or different kinds of knowledge, how they will be exposed. So for me, there is something different in kind of knowledge which is presented when you put the object on your left, so the Polynesian map at the center, or you put the Holy Bible at the beginning of the story of how to talk about science. Unfortunately, exactly for these two museums, we don't have the precise descriptions of how objects should be ordered, so I will have to remind a bit outside, looking at the facades and at some plans what they were thinking about putting inside. And so the first thing, as an HBS historian, I would say that we have to look at museums as objects in themselves, which produce new knowledge, experimental systems, as you can call it. And secondly, I think it's very interesting to look at what architects say about what they design. So not only, it is to people who were trying to devise the museums, put them somewhere, how politicians discuss it, but really how architects think about how they should relate their designs to the very ideas the design should embody. Also because exactly in these two cases, especially in the building of Le Corbusier. So Le Corbusier was in contact with Paul Otlet. Paul Otlet was an internationalist who had the idea of building a Cité Mondiale with Mundaneum, World Museum in the center. And in the correspondence with Le Corbusier, he also changed his ideas a bit. And then also kind of Le Corbusier reified some of the ideas of how to present science, how to connect science more to certain ideas better. So you can, it is a source that normally historians of science wouldn't really look at, and I think that's a really very interesting venue, interesting path to follow. So that is basically how I started. I started exactly with these discussions from Le Corbusier. Then Le Corbusier got also very heavily criticized for his idea of Mundaneum by Karl Teiger. And this discussion also between two architects touched very strongly the idea of science and how Corbusier and Auclair understood science. And also for the Volksstechnik, so for the uncompleted or never realized project of the Technology Museum in Moscow, there is some discussion of architects that I found who commented on the objects in a journal called Architektura SSSR, in an article by Ayakara. So she discussed several of the projects which were prepared for the Volksstechnik. And for example, this project, which is a project by a team by Shusev, was commented that it's very nice, it's a very good representation of science, solid science, but the facade is wrong. The facade doesn't represent the idea of modern technology. So that was the efficiency of the facade. That the facade was ancient and unstyled. All styling should be restored. The second project which Kara discussed was by the team of Golosov, which, and now we have kind of more external discussion here, the building was said to be very well connected to the idea of unity of science and arts, and connected to the portraying the influence of technology on the changing face of the Soviet Union, because it was most modernist. On the other hand, this project from Volksstechnik was criticized as much too ancient and as not referring to the Soviet science as it actually should be. And I would say that exactly this kind of discussion, when not scientists, not scholars discuss about what science is, can give us very good insights into kind of public or to say better intellectual understanding of science at different times. We can, for example, find intentions which were not explicit but which were readable for contemporaries, or also find new categories to speak about historical phenomena beyond the homogenizing or homogeneous scholarly discourse. And if you look at the two projects you have in your program, so at these two buildings, you would be very easily inclined to say that it's the contrast between the Stalinist monumentalism and spiritualism of Auclair, or the future orientation of Soviet utopias and past orientation of the Corbusier Auclair because of the ziggurat. Can we maybe switch off the light and you will see the details better? Thanks. Well, okay, so the ziggurat, this building, which was in the center of the but if you then look at different stages of the projects and different projects, you can also see that in one of the projects which were very highly rated for the CPP, there was also a pyramid in the very, very center. And this project is actually not really modern. So you have really very different understanding by different architects of how to build a museum and which kind of science to represent. And I think we can discuss this kind of using architecture as a source more in the discussion. But so who are actually the actors who are shaping how knowledge is understood in these two situations, in the Volksstechnik and Mondaneum? So for Mondaneum, it's quite clearly Paul Auclair. I will say something more about him in a few minutes. He's an international spiritualist, and Bukharin, who has the idea of Volksstechnik as a center of his techno-propaganda in Turkey. Then we also have the architects and the knowledge of the architects, which influences the shape of the museums very clearly. Then, when we look then at the construction itself, it's also the materials which are included, so which also the possible materials which define possible shapes which can be used. Also the price of materials and so on and so on. So the very last project is also defined by non-material objects. And it's also, in both cases, both understandings of what shapes of the museums are very clearly defined by the nature. So in the case of Dvorec Techniki, it's the Moscow River, which clearly defines here in every project had to define the shape of the museum. And in and for Mondaneum, it's the mountains and the plain, and the mountains play actually a very important role in the way how Le Corbusier designed his project. And both projects were kind of to reflect the nature and thought in a close connection to the nature in a very different manner. So Dvorec Techniki, that you can find in documents about it, should demonstrate how a new socialist man tames the nature. In comparison, Mondaneum, and this is especially the influence of Le Corbusier, should show how science and nature is unified. And in some, there are some hints that for him, the nature is actually kind of something which towers above people, about the science, about technology, and for him, clearly uniting his project, his urbanistic project, in which Mondaneum was to be located with nature, was also to show that the modern science is not the science from the 19th century, it's not a science which was governed by money and technology. And further on, as I told you can look at which different epistemologies are divided into orderings of objects in the museums. And there is actually a lot of people who work on both projects. I mean, especially in the case of Dvorec Techniki, there are estimates that between 1,500 persons to 2,500 persons were involved in projecting, in discussing, in giving the final shape to the projects. But let me say something more about the context in which the projects emerged. So I mentioned already Paul Obsler, which some of you might know, because he's held nowadays as the person who preconceived the internet. So he's a peace activist, author, inventor, and in the 19th century he starts with various projects of cataloging the world, something we call information science. So he's working on the idea of universal classification and propagates an idea of having the knowledge of the whole world stored in one place in the format of catalog cards, and tries to bridge in this way the information divide between different nations. So this is kind of knowledge-based universalism, which is also then the base of his various architectonical projects. And then at some point of time in the early 20th century, he comes with an idea of building a Palais Mondial, which should be the universally available repository of knowledge of the cat catalogs, connected also very closely to the League of Nations. But for many reasons, this never gets built. And then he intends to create a place of universal cooperation, base of knowledge, and that's the Cité Mondiale. Also with different projects within more or less 30 years. And exactly in the Cité Mondiale, the very center should be the World Museum. So that's exactly the museum which was to be in these figurines which you have in program and which I showed you at the very beginning. And for this World Museum, he made several designs, and the most important and discussed one is the one made with Le Corbusier in the late 1920s. And it is also important for the understanding of his ideas and for the shape they took, that apart from being interested in cataloging and unifying science, he was also a theosophist and a mysticist. and in a way elevated science to a religion, which then actually proved to be fatal for all of his projects, because he was accused by conservatives that he's trying to build an Église contre Église, so a church against the church, and that's how especially in Belgium, that was impossible. And that's the picture that Othlet very often used, and I think for many years had in his office. So that's the comité, so the science knowledge which helps the humanity. And Orec-technically, as I mentioned before, was conceived by Bukharin, and here you have one of the photos we had already before. So Bukharin comes from political theorist and philosopher, and at the end of the 1920s he's ousted out from the Soviet party leadership, from Politburo, and then for him the war on science and technology is a refuge. But I think that he also sees it as a possible way of gaining power, and that's probably the way he sees science and technology as inevitable means for progress of the country. So he elevates science and technology, at the center of the politics. And his basic idea is that science is dependent on social needs and has no own independent dynamics. So this own independent dynamics of pure science he conceived as an ill-conceived idealist ideal, and that science can be rational, planned. And additionally, he opposes the science as made in the centers, especially in St. Petersburg, which is for him kind of intellectual opposition, and wants to decentralize science in the Soviet Union in different Naugrady, in different, to delocalize it. So with this, it is quite clear that for both Othlet and Bukharin, the museums they were planning to build were propaganda buildings to propagate specific ideas about science, and they were also totems of triumph. So in Bukharin's case of Soviet techniques, and in Othlet's case of human thought. And both had an interesting vision of internationality behind them. So in the case of the World Museum of Domininovali, it is based on universality of knowledge. And in the case of Dvořec, where the idea of universality doesn't actually come out of the discussion, it's the socialist or Marxist internationalism. But interestingly, all the time when during the project phase, Dvořec was conceived in connection, in a close connection with developments of science museums in the whole world. So here we have one of the posters, one of the first posters about the museum, from which we also can see that it was more or less format as big, to be format as big as the London Museum, so it was actually a huge continent which should be. In very many steps, the comparison to the Deutsches Museum was made. So for during the project phase, Deutsches Museum was seen as the model to follow, but a model which should be changed and reified. And more or less at the same time, there was also a review of a guide of the Deutsches Museum, which was published in 1928, which then was discussed by the project leaders. So the faults of the Deutsches Museum, as the reviewer saw it, was that it was an imperial Germanic project, that it was a capitalist, that the science was kind of presented in a capitalist way, in a city to war, that objects were ordered without a critical methodology, so only chronologically, and showing just in an idealist way the progress of human spirit. And even if there was an idea of universalism of science in the Deutsches Museum, it was always underscored that it was the German work ethic that can make most of it. So it was kind of inscribed nationalism in this universalism. But also, as the reviewer stated, some single chapters in the guide and description included the role of technology, how it shaped the progress, or simply had to include it because the exhibition concentrates, or Deutsches Museum concentrates on objects, and let them tell the story. So that's in the way this story told through objects reveals for the reviewer that the materialism cannot be hidden in the museum. And this review was published in Sozialistische Rekonstrukcja i Nauka, which was a journal very close to Bukharin, so part of this very, very close circle of independence of different projects and groups. And it this review played a very important role in how, as antithesis to Deutsches Museum, Tvorec-Technik was imagined. But if you then look at the practice and of what the museums should be, so neither of them was to be simply a museum, and both were devised with very practical functions in mind. So Tvorec-Technik should not only be a museum, but really something as a laboratory, or even as a center of a statewide techno-propaganda. And this laboratory was to be a very extensive one, being the center of different activities of propagation of Soviet style of doing knowledge, creating exhibitions to be presented in other cities across the Soviet Union, to have its own journal, to produce movies, radio, and so on and so on. And the museum should also have an epistemic function. So in one of the documents we can read that Tvorec-Technik should present the history of techniques as a method of criticism and change of the present techniques by the past one. And additionally, this exposition of Tvorec-Technik should be future-oriented, and this presents the possible ways of development, and especially with the changing exposition. Although this kind of, for me, strangely contradicts the idea that technology is always a response to socioeconomic conditions. And for also Ottler devised his work museum with practical function, so as a tool to forge a global order through ordering of knowledge. So the aim of the museum was not a preservation, but a systematic exposition and demonstration of knowledge. So an exploratory and composite museum, a tool and aid for research and scientific work, the collection of which, the collection of the museum should be accessible for everybody at the same time. The exposition should be under continuous critical review and could be reorganized anytime, so that the usefulness could be maximized according to the user's needs. And also the construction of the ziggurat had an educational purpose. So it was, from top to bottom. Basically, every person who got to the ziggurat started go through the lift to the top and then ascended to the bottom. And this going from top to the bottom was an ascent from nature to culture. And now, I quote Le Corbusier, the visitor will be prepared, made ready. During the ascent, he will gradually have shed the small, expedient and immediate preoccupations of his existence. He will have stopped worrying about the press of his pants or his digestion. So he turned this ascension as a process of individual shedding of the nature and becoming a cultural being. And we have here also a kind of hint of mysticism. And even if one looks at the design of the whole Cité Mondiale, then it's even more called through the urban composition, especially because it was based on the golden section, and Ottler was Ottler was writing that basing the cité on the golden section means that it was purify the view and direct the viewer. That got him a lot of criticism from the functionalists, but he stuck to it. While both projects should serve propaganda and education, from the beginning on they differed very strongly as to their relation to the public and the question who has access to the knowledge. So for Ottler, who we hear as more internationalist, science had a privileged role in the process, and the world museum should only be accessible for the chosen elites. And also this should be architectonically emphasized, as the building should tower over the other ones. In some plans in the construction, it was basically on a hill over the Cité Mondiale. In this case, simply tower because of the ziggurat. And in comparison to this and to this idea of exclusion of exclusive knowledge, what it's technically should be, middle in Moscow, it should be very open. And also this should be reflected in open architecture, boats with big green space outside, for people to walk around, but also it should have a large number of entrances. So there was, the basic idea that everyone at every time should have access from basically every direction. But it's not only the idea of openness and closure that differs, but also the vision of progress of both museums differs. So if you can think of an embodiment of an idealist vision of progress as something different to the Marxist one, then the World Museum is actually very close to it. So the ascendant of the ziggurats, so the paths, as I told you, which every visitor has to follow, should allow him to shed the toil of his everyday life. So the quotation I gave from Le Corbusier. There was a descent from the nature. There was a descent from the nature. So from the top of the tower, and from the top of the tower, the view was Mont Blanc. It should be the descent from the nature to the very middle. So here, at the very end of the walk, every visitor will encounter something which was called a sacrarium. And sacrarium was a place, so a closed space, a very dark space, devoted to ethics, to philosophy and religion. There's the description says a surrounding cylindrical, smooth and blank wall with the separation of air, water and the earth, and surrounding representations of Giotto, Michelangelo, the portraits of Rousseau and Voltaire, the Sun King, its men and their works, and of all enlightened Europe until Haussmann, Napoleon III, and the Plan of Paris. So you basically have, inscribed in this project, you have the progress of the humanity, but at the end it's a progress which is not confined to sciences or to philosophy, but equally includes urbanists. So here you also have the influence of Le Corbusier. But it's not only the beginning and the end of the exposition of the ziggurats that makes visitor trust in continuous progress. But when they are moving through the ziggurat, they actually don't see much ahead. And it was especially made by Corbusier a very dark. The whole exposition was to be very dark, as he writes, so that people, kind of blindly follow the path of progress. I don't know how many of you were in Central Solos building. Also there you have this kind of, because of the spiral, you have only one path. Because it's dark, you have to blindly follow it. You cannot really go astray for it. And Le Corbusier writes to it. I have allowed the Museum of Human Creation to follow a spiral, not because spiral is the last word of fashion, but to assure through this unique means the absolute continuity of events in history. I cannot see any other way of doing this. So also you have the architectonic figure of science. Dvorets, in comparison, couldn't follow the linear development of science for many reasons, and basically it was structured also from the beginning on not as one unit, but it was to be divided into 7 branches of technology, sometimes with aid, with military, and each part should be located in a separate building. So it's not problem-oriented, as we heard about Bukharin and his idea of science, but it's really kind of divisions of technology. And also, in comparison to Mundaneum, Dvorets technically should include a part on military, but this part of military was kind of, never as a part of the main exhibition. It should be made somehow very clear that it belongs there, but it's actually not a part of technology. So it's kind of a double role of military in the technical development. And each of the 7 sections should begin with a small historical introduction, which was mostly divided into epochs, and then should also include a short description of socioeconomic characteristics of a given period, the demands which the given period posed, how the solutions to these demands were related to theories of the epoch, how these demands were really solved through machines and processes, and which problems remained unsolved and which problems were newly formulated at this epoch. So with this you have an idealized structure of a research process which should then defy the idea of pure science and convince the visitors that that development of science and technology is not a result of mathematics, and that's a quotation from documents. And apart from it, but this is not really sure how it should be achieved in practice. The exhibition in the Dvorec should convince the visitors that the planned science, planned technology, planned economy is more efficient than the anarchic system of economics of the capitalist states, as also one of the states. So with this, what you have is a brief and kind of very superficial description of something I would term images of knowledge, to use the term of Yehuda Elkanah, which have been co-produced at an intersection of scholarly and architectural imagination. And I think I showed that these images of knowledge touch categories like universalism, or the nature of scientific progress, the shape of a good research, the question of utility of science, or science's relation to the environment. So basically, several of the issues we are discussing throughout our conference. And why, in the way I presented them here, it is clearly connected with political and intellectual positions of Otle and Bukharin, respectively. In the round table, in more or less 2 hours, I will argue that it's actually possible to look at this construction of the museum from exactly the other side and tell the story descended from the people and use then a different concept of politics. But I think, I find the other story, the story I will tell in 2 hours, much more promising from the point of view of political epistemology. And I think that I will tell the story all the way around. But at least I hope that I gave you some ideas for the further discussion. And if not, then at least that I gave you some entertainment.
Well, just a rather banal empirical question, maybe not a fair one, depending on the kind of research you've done so far. But for those people who are advocating this gladiator technically, right here in Moscow, what was it they didn't like about the
Polytechnics Museum? Yeah, it was a science museum. So for them, the interesting thing is, so they mentioned it actually only several times. And that I found very, very interesting. But I think that was because, the Polytechnic Museum was part of the academy. And then, they wanted, so I think it's a part of Bukharin's politics to, have his kind of knowledge differ from the knowledge of the academy. So academy joins the project very, very late. The problem is I didn't have the access to the fonts because the Polytechnic Museums closed the fonts exactly 2 months ago. And we'll reopen them in 10 days. Then I can tell you a bit more. But as far as I know, they saw themselves as antipodes.
A sort of cognitive follow-up. There's sort of a classic model of a museum where you come, you witness, you are improved by the act of witnessing. It's a banal sense of education and cultivation, right? But the next challenge, I think, would be to understand whether the ambitions of the designers of the events technically are explicitly trying to get beyond that. And what motivates me is the wonderful work of Margareta Föderner. She's written about Rudolfkin's mechanics of the brain. And she says the following about what the film does. The film did not analyze the world by means of the apparatus, the film camera, right? In order to show it in the movie theater, right? But it produced the art of seeing, the manner of seeing of the viewer himself, and right on the spot, outside the film laboratory and inside the movie theater, right? It's teaching the witness to induce the proper effects and therefore sort of train themselves a little. I wonder if that kind of cognitive ambition is anywhere in evidence here with these designers.
I would say yes. With Otle and Le Corbusier actually try to be quite explicit. And with Boris technically at least not explicit. But yes, they have this, exactly conditioning effect.
It's maybe a short question. If you have some access to idea of exhibition or some introduction, as text. Is it any idea of maybe not dark, but the gray side of science is represented in this project, or science is only a light of sun, every time positively treatment, and so on? Because first of all, in Soviet critical discourse, in also not in newspaper but mostly in journal, it's usually idea of elitarism of old science and new democratic character of our new modern Soviet type science. And this idea may be elitism or something else as gray side of science. Is it representative in this project?
So, I mean, in modern, no. In Dvorets, technically, yes. It should be shown that science is connected to imperialist projects and colonialist projects. But that's so far everything I found. So there is a really short statement about it, and this is rather kind of connected to our and the other science.
So it's critical also.
So the critical is also the only in the connection with Western imperialism.
But not core, for example, noble science of.
No.
It's mostly capitalistic science.
Exactly. Yeah.
So thank you all.